The galactic despair. The galaxy was burning. Once thriving planets now floated as lifeless husks in the cold void of space. Entire civilizations had fallen to the void, an enemy so ruthless, so unstoppable, that even the most advanced species were left helpless. The Galactic Council, a coalition of the most powerful races in the galaxy, had tried everything: diplomacy, brute force, and strategies devised by the most brilliant minds across countless star systems. Nothing worked. Inside the Grand Council chamber on Zeltra Prime, the mood was heavy. The room, once a place of hope and unity, now felt like a tomb. The representatives of the various species sat around a circular table, their faces grim. Holographic projections of their homeworlds flickered above them, many marked with red warnings: critical condition, or uninhabitable. "We cannot win," boomed the deep, guttural voice of Gorak, a towering reptilian leader. His claws scraped against the polished surface of the table as he leaned forward. "The void is beyond anything we've ever faced. Our weapons are useless. Our fleets are shattered. If we continue this war, we are only delaying the inevitable." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Even the once proud Mirren, a race known for their unshakable optimism, looked defeated. "Then what do you suggest?" asked Valera, a sleek, silver-skinned diplomat from the Seraphine race. Her voice was calm, but her glowing eyes betrayed her fear. "Should we surrender? Beg for mercy? You've seen what the void does to its prisoners. There is no mercy." Silence followed her words. No one wanted to admit it, but they all knew she was right. The void consumed everything: planets, people, and even hope itself. That was when the doors to the chamber hissed open. All eyes turned as a small group of humans entered. They were an odd sight among the towering, elegant, or fearsome figures of the other species. Humans were a relatively new addition to the galactic stage. Considered primitive by most, they lacked the advanced technology of the Zultrans or the physical might of the Gorikans. To many in the room, they were insignificant. But the human leading the group had an air of confidence that demanded attention. Commander Ellis, a sharp-eyed woman with a scar running down her cheek, strode to the center of the room. Her uniform was simple, but the way she carried herself made her seem larger than life. "You called us here to discuss the end of the war," Ellis began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "But from what I've heard, you're not discussing how to win. You're discussing how to give up." Several alien representatives bristled at her tone. Gorak let out a low growl. "Watch your tongue, human. This is no place for your arrogance." Ellis didn't flinch. "It's not arrogance. It's reality. You've all been fighting the void on their terms, using strategies they've already adapted to. Of course you're losing. But humanity has faced impossible odds before, and we've learned one thing: the fight isn't over until we say it is." A few council members scoffed. Others exchanged skeptical glances, but Valera leaned forward, curiosity glimmering in her eyes. "And what exactly do you propose, Commander? What could your people possibly offer that the rest of us cannot?" Ellis smirked, the kind of smile that promised something unexpected. She tapped a small device on her wrist, and a hologram appeared above the table. It showed a chaotic battlefield where small, agile human ships outmaneuvered a massive void warship. The void's weapons fired relentlessly, but the human ships darted in and out, targeting weak points with precision. In the end, the warship exploded in a blinding flash of light. The room erupted in murmurs. "That's impossible," Gorak snarled. "The void's ships are indestructible." "Not if you know where to hit them," Ellis replied calmly. "This was a battle near the Andros system. A single human fleet took down one of their warships because we adapted. We studied their tactics, found their weaknesses, and used unconventional methods. The void doesn't expect that. They're used to enemies who play by the rules. We don't." The murmurs grew louder, this time mixed with intrigue. Valera's eyes narrowed. "And how do you plan to scale this strategy? One victory doesn't win a war." Ellis stepped closer to the table, her voice steady and resolute. "Give us a chance. Let humanity take the lead in the next operation. You've all been fighting to survive. We're ready to fight to win." For a moment, the room was silent. Then, a representative from the Myrans spoke up, their voice soft but firm. "What do we have to lose? Let them try." Gorak slammed his clawed hand on the table. "This is madness." "No," Valera said, standing. "It's desperation. But perhaps that's what we need." Ellis looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every council member. "You've all given up hope. Humanity hasn't. Let us show you what we can do." The council deliberated for hours, but in the end, they agreed. Humanity would lead the next mission. As Ellis and her team left the chamber, she allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy had counted humanity out, but that was their mistake. The void had no idea what was coming, and neither did the rest of the galaxy. Humanity's secret weapon. The battlefield was chaos. In the void of space, thousands of ships clashed in a deadly dance of fire and light. Alien fleets, sleek and sophisticated, moved in precise formations, their laser cannons firing in synchronized bursts. Against them loomed the monstrosities of the void, warships that looked like living shadows, writhing with an unnatural energy. And then, cutting through the carnage, came the humans. Their ships were smaller, rougher, and far less elegant than the sleek crafts of their alien allies. They shouldn't have stood a chance. Yet, where alien vessels crumbled under the overwhelming force of the void, the human ships pressed forward, defying every prediction. "Human ship Beta 12, evasive pattern now," barked a voice over the comms. Inside one of the battered human vessels, Captain Iris Rook gritted her teeth as the ship jolted violently. Sparks rained from the control panels as alarms blared. Her co-pilot, a wiry young man with wide, panicked eyes, shouted over the chaos, "Captain, shields are down to 20%. "Good," Rook growled, her lip luck. Ellis raised an eyebrow. "What you just saw wasn't luck. It was Project Starfire." At the mention of the project, several of the human officers glanced at each other uneasily. Ellis noticed but ignored it. She tapped a control panel, and a new hologram appeared, showing the schematics of a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. "This is the disruptor," Ellis explained. "It's designed to destabilize the void's energy fields. We've been testing it in secret for months. Today was its first real deployment. And as you can see, it works." Valera's eyes narrowed. "You've been hiding this from us. Would you have trusted us with the lid if we hadn't proven ourselves first?" Ellis shot back. "You called us primitive, insignificant. Now you're watching us take down enemies you thought were invincible." The alien representatives exchanged uneasy glances. They couldn't deny the results. Gorak growled, "Even with this disruptor, you're still outnumbered. The void will adapt. It always does." Ellis nodded. "You're right. That's why this is just the beginning." Back on the battlefield, the tide was turning. Human ships, working in small, agile units, disrupted the void's formations, while the larger alien fleets moved in to deliver the killing blows. It wasn't perfect. Losses were still heavy. But for the first time, the Allied forces were pushing back. In the midst of the chaos, Captain Rook's voice came through the comms, ragged but victorious. "This is Beta 12. Void warship down. Repeat, void warship down." Ellis allowed herself a small smile. "Good work, Beta 12. Return to base for debriefing." But even as the humans celebrated their victory, Ellis knew it was only a matter of time before the void struck back. They were learning, adapting, just as humanity was. The real war hadn't even begun. As the flagship hummed with activity, Ellis stood alone, staring out the observation window. The stars stretched endlessly before her, each one a potential battlefield. "They don't know what we're capable of," she muttered to herself. "But they'll find out soon enough." The enemy strikes back. The alarm screamed through the corridors of the orbital command station above Earth. Red lights bathed the steel walls, and the hum of panicked voices filled the air. Officers and engineers scrambled to their posts, their faces pale. They had seen the reports, the footage from the outer colonies. Now it was happening here. The void was coming. From her position in the station's command center, Commander Ellis stared at the tactical display with grim determination. The holographic map showed a fleet of void warships breaking through the last line of outer defenses, closing in on Earth like a storm of living shadows. Their sheer size dwarfed anything humanity had ever encountered. Ellis clenched her fists. Status on planetary defenses. A young officer, sweat dripping down his temple, stammered, "Orbital cannons are operational, but they'll only slow them down. Ground-based missile systems are ready. But, Commander, it won't be enough." "It has to be," Ellis said sharply. "We've faced impossible odds before. We'll face them again." As she spoke, a deep rumble shook the station, throwing several officers off balance. The Void's vanguard ships had entered firing range, their energy blasts tearing through Earth's orbital fleet like paper. On the screen, one of humanity's largest warships, the Resolute, was struck directly in its core. It erupted in a violent explosion, scattering debris into the void. Ellis grimaced. "Redirect all remaining ships to Sector 3. They need to hold the line." "But Commander, that sector's defenses are already compromised," the officer began. "Then we reinforce them." Ellis snapped. "We can't let them breach Earth's atmosphere." Down on the planet's surface, the scene was no less chaotic. Air raid sirens wailed across cities as millions of people rushed to underground shelters. Families clung to one another, fear etched into every face. News broadcasts flickered on giant screens, showing grim reports of devastation across the system. In a cramped bunker deep beneath New Europa, one of Earth's last major cities, a young girl clutched a worn teddy bear, her wide eyes fixed on her mother. "Mommy, are the bad ships going to hurt us?" The mother forced a shaky smile and smoothed the girl's hair. "No, sweetheart. The soldiers will protect us. They always do." But outside, the skies told a different story. The horizon was painted with streaks of fire as human and void ships clashed above the atmosphere. The explosions lit up the night, a grim reminder that the war was no longer distant. It was here. Back on the station, Ellis was out of options. She turned to her chief engineer, a wiry man named Mendez. "Is Project Starfire operational yet?" Mendez hesitated, his face pale. "Commander, it's still experimental. If we activate it now, we risk." "We don't have time for risks," Ellis interrupted. "If we don't use it, there won't be anything left to save." Mendez nodded reluctantly and rushed to his console. Across the station, engineers and technicians worked furiously to bring Project Starfire online. The experimental weapon, humanity's last hope, had been designed to harness the Void's own energy against it. But it had never been tested on this scale. As the weapon powered up, the station itself began to tremble. Lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Ellis braced herself against the command table, her voice cutting through the chaos. "All ships, this is Commander Ellis. Fall back to defensive positions. We're deploying Starfire." The response came immediately. "Commander, that'll put the station directly in the line of fire." Ellis's jaw tightened. "I'm aware. Just hold your positions." The void ships closed in, their tendrils of shadow reaching toward Earth's fragile defenses. The lead ship, a monstrous behemoth unlike anything seen before, fired a blast of energy directly at the orbital station. It struck the outer hull, sending a shockwave through the structure. Ellis stumbled but didn't fall. She stared at the holographic display, watching as the enemy prepared for another strike. "Mendez, we need Starfire online. Now." "Almost there," Mendez shouted, his fingers flying across the controls. "Just a few more seconds." The weapon's hum grew into a deafening roar. On the station's outer deck, A massive array of glowing panels lit up, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Then, with a sound like a thunderclap, Project Starfire unleashed its first attack. A beam of energy, brighter than 1,000 suns, tore through the void of space. It struck the Lid void ship directly, shattering its shadowy armor. The creature-like vessel writhed, its tendrils flailing wildly before it disintegrated in a burst of light and darkness. Cheers erupted across the command center, but Ellis didn't join in. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display, where dozens more void ships continued their advance. "This isn't over," she muttered. "They'll adapt. They always do." Sure enough, the remaining void fleet began to shift their formation, moving to flank the station. Ellis turned to her team. "Prepare for a second strike. We're not letting them through." On the surface, the people of Earth watched in awe as the skies above lit up with Starfire's brilliant beams. For the first time, there was hope, a fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity could survive this. But Ellis knew better. As she stood on the command deck, surrounded by the chaos of battle, she felt the weight of every life on Earth pressing down on her shoulders. The void wasn't just an enemy. It was a force of nature, and humanity had just poked the beast. "Let's see if it bleeds," she whispered, her gaze never leaving the battle outside. Into the void's den. The stars disappeared. Humanity's fleet plunged deeper into the uncharted regions of the galaxy, a place so dark and lifeless it seemed to devour light itself. The void around them was eerily silent, a stark contrast to the chaos of the battles they'd left behind. The only sounds aboard the ships were the hum of engines and the occasional nervous chatter of the crew. Commander Ellis stood at the front of the flagship's bridge, staring at the vast nothingness through the reinforced observation window. Her expression was stoic, but her mind raced. The maps humanity had gathered from their alien allies ended here. What lay ahead was unknown. "Commander," came the voice of Captain Rook, her image flickering on a nearby holoscreen. "The fleet is holding formation, but the crew's on edge. This place, it's not right." Ellis didn't turn. "It's the void's home territory. It's not supposed to feel right." "But it's more than that," Rook insisted. "Sensors are acting strange. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Signals that vanish before we can trace them. It's like the space itself is alive." Ellis finally turned to face her. "Good. Let them know we're here." The deeper they ventured, the stranger things became. A scout ship sent ahead to map the area sent back only static before vanishing entirely. Another reported detecting what looked like a derelict alien station, but when they approached, it dissolved into smoke. In the fleet's medical bay, a young engineer whispered to her bunkmate, "I swear I saw something moving out there." Like a hand made of shadows, reaching for the ship. Her bunkmate, a seasoned veteran, shook his head. "It's just your mind playing tricks. Keep your focus or you'll lose it out here." But even the veteran couldn't deny the oppressive weight of the darkness surrounding them. It felt like being watched, judged by an unseen predator. On the flagship, Ellis convened her officers in the war room. A hologram of their location glowed in the center, but it was frustratingly blank. "We're flying blind," Lieutenant Mendez said, his voice tense. "Our long-range sensors are useless. The only thing we're picking up are echoes. It's like the space around us is shifting." "That's not space," said Valera, the Seraphine diplomat who had joined them for the mission. Her silver eyes glimmered with unease. "That's the void itself. They're aware of us now. They're studying us." The room fell silent at her words. Ellis broke it with her usual steel resolve. "Let them study. We're here for answers, not comfort. Mendez, keep the fleet on high alert. If anything moves, I want to know about it." Valera frowned. "You don't understand. The void doesn't just fight with ships and weapons. It gets inside your head. It twists reality. If your crew starts seeing things, hearing things, it's already too late." Ellis leaned forward, her gaze piercing. Then it's a good thing humanity has dealt with nightmares before. Hours later, the fleet encountered its first true obstacle. A massive structure loomed ahead, its form shifting and flickering like a mirage. It was ancient, scared by time, and pulsated with a faint, malevolent energy. "Is that one of their ships?" Rook asked over the comms. "No," Valera said softly, staring at the hologram in awe. "It's a graveyard, a monument to their power." Ellis straightened. "Explain." Valera gestured to the hologram. "This is where they bring their defeated enemies, not to bury them, but to absorb them. Those ships, they aren't dead. They're part of the void now." Ellis felt a chill run down her spine. If that was true, then every race the void had consumed was here, trapped forever as part of this grotesque monument. "Can we navigate through it?" Ellis asked. "It's a labyrinth," Mendez said, scanning the readings. "But if we map it carefully, we might." A sudden jolt shook the ship. The lights flickered and alarms blared. "Incoming," someone shouted. Through the observation window, Ellis saw them. Void drones, small, fast-moving creatures made of the same living shadow as the larger ships. They swarmed the fleet like a plague, their movements erratic and unpredictable. "All ships, engage," Ellis ordered. The battle was chaos. The drones darted in and out of weapon range, their forms constantly shifting. Human ships fired relentlessly, but for every drone destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. Ellis slammed her hand on the comms console. "We need to punch through. Focus all firepower on clearing a path." "But Commander," Rook's voice came through, strained, "we'll lose half the fleet if we stay exposed like this. We'll lose everything if we don't keep moving." Ellis snapped. "Do your job, Captain." After what felt like an eternity, the fleet managed to break through the swarm. The surviving ships limped toward the far side of the structure, their hulls scared and their crews shaken. Ellis stood at the observation window, her hands clenched behind her back. The battle had cost them dearly, too many lives, too many ships, but they were still moving forward. In the distance, something massive stirred, a shadow larger than anything they had encountered yet. "Commander," Valera said quietly, her voice trembling, "I think we found their heart." Ellis didn't flinch. "Good. Let's see what it's made of." The fleet pressed onward, into the heart of the void. The final confrontation was coming, and Ellis knew one thing for certain. Whatever waited for them ahead, there would be no turning back. The truth about the void. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic projector. Suspended in the air above the circular table was the image of a creature, not one of the void ships, but something ancient, something alive. Its form was massive and grotesque, its surface a shifting mosaic of light and shadow. Around it spun entire galaxies, dwarfed by its unimaginable scale. Commander Ellis sat at the head of the table, her sharp eyes fixed on the hologram. Around her were the fleet's top officers, the alien diplomat Valera, and a small group of scientists. Their expressions ranged from shock to outright horror. This isn't just a war machine," whispered Dr. Kale, the lead xenoscientist, his voice trembling. "It's a god." "No," Ellis said firmly. "It's not a god. It's an abomination." Valera stood, her silver eyes locked on the image. "Commander, what you're looking at is the origin of the void. This is what we found in the data you retrieved from their core worlds. This creature, this entity, was created billions of years ago by an ancient race we call the Arak-Shar." Ellis's eyes narrowed. "Created? Why would anyone build something like this?" Dr. Kale tapped on his datapad, and a hologram shifted, showing ancient carvings and hieroglyphs from the Arak-Shar's ruins. The Arak-Shar were the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. They conquered death, harnessed the energy of stars, and reshaped entire worlds. But with all their power, they feared one thing: annihilation. Valera continued, her tone grim. To protect themselves, they created this weapon. A sentient, self-replicating force designed to consume anything that posed a threat to their empire. Ellis crossed her arms. And let me guess, it turned on them. Dr. Kale nodded. Exactly. The entity became too powerful, too intelligent. It saw everything as a potential threat, including its creators. It consumed the HFY and then began expanding, absorbing entire civilizations into itself. Ellis leaned forward, her voice sharp. If this thing is sentient, does it have a weakness? Can it be reasoned with? Valera shook her head. Reason? No. Its mind is alien, beyond comprehension. But there's something else in the data, something the HFY left behind. A failsafe. The room fell silent again as Dr. Kale brought up a new hologram. This time, it showed a strange device, an intricate lattice of glowing crystals suspended in a sphere of dark matter. The HFY called this the core fragment, Kale explained. It's the only thing the void fears because it was designed to sever its connection to the rest of itself. If we can find it and activate it, we can stop the void from spreading. Ellis studied the hologram. Where is it? Kale hesitated. That's the problem. It's inside the void's central nexus, deep in their territory, surrounded by their strongest defenses. Ellis smirked faintly. So we're going right into the heart of the beast. Valera stepped forward, her expression serious. Commander, this isn't just a battle. This is a suicide mission. The closer we get to the nexus, the stronger the void's influence will become. It doesn't just attack with ships. It will try to break us, to turn us against each other. Ellis met her gaze without flinching. We've faced our own demons before, Valera. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our weapons or technology. It's that we don't break. As the meeting ended, Ellis returned to the observation deck. She stood alone, staring out into the blackness. The stars seemed dimmer now, as if even they feared what lay ahead. The door slid open behind her, and Captain Rook stepped in. You really think this plan is going to work? Ellis didn't turn. It has to. Rook moved to stand beside her. The crew's scared, Commander. They've seen what the void can do, and now we're heading straight for it. Ellis glanced at her, a flicker of warmth in her otherwise cold demeanor. Fear keeps us sharp, but remind them why we're here. If we don't do this, Earth falls. The galaxy falls. We're not just fighting for survival anymore. Rook, we're fighting to end this. Rook nodded, but her unease lingered. And if we fail? Ellis's voice was steady. Then we make sure the void remembers who we are. The fleet began its journey toward the nexus, navigating through treacherous terrain where reality itself seemed to warp. Crew members reported hearing voices in the corridors, whispers that sounded like loved ones lost in the war. Others saw fleeting shadows, shapes that disappeared when approached. On one ship, a pilot froze at his station, staring at a monitor. Commander, I'm seeing Earth. Ellis's voice came through the comms, sharp and commanding. It's not real. Focus on your mission. But it's not real. The pilot shook his head, breaking free of the illusion. But the strain was taking its toll on everyone. The void wasn't just attacking their ships, it was attacking their minds. Finally, the fleet arrived at the edge of the nexus. Before them loomed a massive structure, pulsating with dark energy. It looked less like a fortress and more like a living thing, a monstrous heart, beating with an unnatural rhythm. Ellis stood on the bridge, her jaw set. This is it. All ships, prepare for final approach. Valera's voice came through the comms, quieter now. Commander, if we don't come back, I just want you to know, your species has surprised me. You've shown more courage than I ever thought possible. Ellis allowed herself a faint smile. Stick with us, Valera. We're just getting started. As the fleet advanced toward the nexus, the darkness seemed to close in around them. But humanity didn't stop. They had learned one truth in the depths of despair: the void wasn't invincible. And now they carried the only weapon that could destroy it: humanity's sacrifice. The void was alive. Human ships darted through the black expanse like sparks in a dying fire, their hulls battered, their engines roaring against the oppressive silence. The Nexus loomed ahead, a swirling, chaotic mass of energy and shadow, pulsating with malevolence. It was the void's heart, the living monolith that seemed to mock their presence with every pulse. Commander Ellis stood at the center of her flagship's bridge, her hands gripping the edges of the command console. Around her, the crew moved with practiced precision, their faces pale but determined. The hum of the engines and the faint crackle of comms filled the air. "This is it," Ellis said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're at the gates of hell. Let's make sure it remembers us." In the heart of the fleet, Captain Rook's ship led the first wave. Her voice crackled over the comms, steady despite the chaos. "Fleet, form up and prepare for evasive maneuvers. The closer we get, the worse it'll get. Stay sharp." As if on cue, the Nexus roared to life. Tendrils of energy, dark and writhing, lashed out at the fleet. Ships dodged and weaved, but the tendrils moved like predators, targeting anything that strayed too close. "Beta 12 down," came a voice over the comms, panicked and choked. "Focus," Rook snapped. "We knew the risks. Keep moving." Inside her ship, the tension was unbearable. The lights flickered as the ship's systems strained under the pressure. Rook glanced at her weapons officer. "Do we have a clear shot at the core?" "Not yet, Captain," the officer replied. "The interference is too strong." Rook gritted her teeth. "Then we'll make one." Back on the flagship, Ellis monitored the battle with a sharp eye. The fleet was holding, for now, but every second brought them closer to collapse. The void wasn't just fighting them with ships, it was fighting their minds. Reports came in of hallucinations, crew members turning on each other, entire ships falling silent without explanation. Ellis knew they were running out of time. "Status on the core fragment," she demanded. Mendez, her chief engineer, looked up from his station, sweat dripping down his face. "We're ready, Commander, but the closer we get to the Nexus, the more unstable it becomes. If we activate it too soon." "It won't matter if we don't make it to the core," Ellis interrupted. She turned to Valera, who stood nearby, her usual composure slipping. "You said the failsafe would work. Are you sure?" Valera hesitated, then nodded. "It's our best chance, but it requires direct contact with the core. Someone will have to deliver it manually." Ellis's jaw tightened. She had suspected as much. The fleet pressed forward, but the cost was staggering. Ships were torn apart, their crews swallowed by the darkness. Rook's ship barely avoided destruction, its hull scorched from a near miss with one of the Nexus's tendrils. "We're not going to make it," one of her officers whispered, his voice trembling. "Yes, we are," Rook snapped, "because we don't have a choice." The words hit harder than she intended. They all knew what this mission meant. Sacrifice was inevitable. On the flagship, Ellis made her decision. "Rook," she said over the comms, her voice steady, "get your ship in position. We'll cover you." "What about you?" Rook replied, her tone sharp with suspicion. Ellis didn't answer directly. "Just do your job, Captain. That's an order." Rook hesitated but finally responded. "Understood." Ellis turned to Mendez. "Prepare the core fragment for deployment. I'm taking it myself." The room fell silent. Valera stepped forward, her silver eyes wide. "You can't. You're the commander. Your people need you." "They'll need someone to finish what we started," Ellis said. She looked at Valera, her gaze softening for just a moment. "This isn't about me. It's about giving humanity, and the galaxy, a chance." Valera opened her mouth to argue but stopped. She saw the resolve in Ellis's eyes and knew there was no changing her mind. Ellis suited up in the ship's hangar, the core fragment secured in a containment unit. Around her, the remaining crew saluted silently. There were no speeches, no grand farewells. They all understood what this meant. "Commander," Rook's voice came through the comms. "You better come back. That's an order." Ellis smirked faintly. Good luck enforcing that. As the fleet made its final push, Ellis launched from the flagship in a small, heavily armored shuttle. The Nexus loomed ahead, its energy crackling and twisting like a living storm. The tendrils lashed out at her, but she maneuvered with precision, dodging the attacks with an almost inhuman focus. Inside the shuttle, alarms blared. Hull integrity was failing, but Ellis didn't stop. She pushed the shuttle to its limits, breaking through the Nexus's outer defenses. Finally, she reached the core. It was massive, a swirling vortex of dark and light, its energy pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "This is for Earth," Ellis whispered. She activated the core fragment and launched it directly into the vortex. The reaction was immediate. The Nexus shuddered violently, its energy collapsing in on itself. The tendrils recoiled, and the void ships began to falter, their movements becoming sluggish and disoriented. On the flagship, the crew watched in stunned silence as the Nexus imploded, its monstrous form reduced to nothingness. Ellis's shuttle disappeared in the explosion, her final words lost in the chaos. But humanity's sacrifice had worked. The void was broken, its power severed. Across the galaxy, Allied forces reported void ships retreating, their strength fading without the Nexus to guide them. In the silence that followed, Valera whispered, "She did it. She actually did it." Rook's voice came through the comms, choked with emotion. "We lost too much today, but we won. That's what matters." And for the first time in years, the galaxy had hope. Humanity fights back. The galaxy was silent, not the peaceful silence of distant stars or the serene hum of cosmic stillness, but the heavy, suffocating silence that follows devastation. The Void's Nexus had been destroyed, its core severed by the bravery of Commander Ellis. Yet humanity's greatest sacrifice had only bought them time. Across the galaxy, void ships writhed like wounded beasts, their once unrelenting strength faltering but not broken. They were retreating to regroup, adapting as they always did. For humanity and its allies, this was their only chance, to strike before the void could recover. On the bridge of the Dauntless, now the flagship of humanity's fleet, Captain Rook stared at the tactical display. The remnants of their forces had gathered here, near a dying star, preparing for the final assault. The combined fleets of humanity and its reluctant allies were battered and bruised but ready. "Status report," Rook said, her voice steady but heavy with responsibility. Lieutenant Mendez, now serving as her second-in-command, looked up from his console. "We've got 26 ships operational. That's including the patched-up ones. Ammunition is low, and some systems are still unstable, but we'll hold." Rook nodded. "We don't need to hold forever, just long enough to finish this." Valera, the Seraphine diplomat, stood near the observation window, her silver eyes reflecting the dying light of the star. "The void is fractured, but it's not defeated. If we fail now, it will return stronger than ever." Rook turned to her, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We're not going to fail." The fleet moved out, engines roaring as they surged toward the void's retreating armada. The battlefield was a graveyard of ruined ships, the debris of countless civilizations consumed by the void. Among the wreckage floated the shattered remnants of humanity's earlier victories, a stark reminder of the cost. "Listen up," Rook said over the fleet-wide comms. Her voice was calm, steady, and unyielding. "You've seen what the void can do. You've lost friends, family, and homes to this monster. But today, we end this. We're not fighting for survival anymore. We're fighting for the galaxy, for everyone who thought they'd never see hope again. Let's make them remember us, not as the ones who fell, but as the ones who fought back." Across the fleet, the response was a unified roar. Humans and aliens alike, united by the desperate hope that this would be their final stand. As the fleet closed in, the void ships turned, their shadowy forms trembling with residual power. They were wounded but still deadly, their tendrils of energy lashing out as if in desperation. The first wave of human ships engage, weaving through the chaos with precision and determination. Focus fire on their command ships. Rook ordered. Take out their leaders, and the rest will fall apart. The void responded with ferocity, their weapons tearing through the human fleet. Ships exploded in blinding flashes, their crews lost to the darkness. But humanity didn't retreat. They pressed forward, exploiting the fractures in the void's once unbreakable formations. In the heart of the battle, the Dauntless fought like a cornered predator. Its cannons roared, tearing through the enemy with relentless fury. Rook stood at the helm, barking orders and coordinating strikes. "We're taking too much damage," Mendes shouted over the chaos. "We're taking them with us." Rook fired back. A sudden explosion rocked the ship, sending Rook tumbling to the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her vision blurred. The comms crackled, Valera's voice cutting through the static. "Captain, the central void ship is exposed. Its core is destabilizing. If we can breach it, we can trigger a chain reaction and take out the rest of the fleet." Rook wiped the blood from her forehead and straightened. "What's the catch?" "You'll need to get close," Valera said. "Too close." Rook glanced around the bridge at her crew. They all knew what this meant. "Prepare for a direct assault," she ordered. "We're taking that ship down." The Dauntless surged forward, weaving through the chaos as its crew poured everything they had into the final strike. Void tendrils lashed out, tearing chunks from the ship's hull. But they pressed on. "Target locked," Mendes reported, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Fire everything we've got," Rook commanded. The ship's cannons roared, unleashing a barrage of missiles and energy blasts. The Void's central ship shuddered, its shadowy form splintering under the assault. Its core, a pulsating sphere of dark energy, began to glow brighter, unstable and ready to collapse. As the central void ship detonated, a chain reaction rippled through the enemy fleet. One by one, the void ships imploded, their tendrils recoiling as if in agony. The darkness that had consumed so much of the galaxy began to dissipate, replaced by the faint light of distant stars. On the bridge of the Dauntless, the crew watched in stunned silence as the battlefield cleared. They had won. Rook sank into her chair, exhaustion washing over her. "Status report." Mendes smiled faintly. "The Void fleet is gone. We did it." Valera stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the remnants of the battle. "No," she said softly. "You did it. Across the galaxy." The news spread like wildfire. The Void, the unstoppable force that had consumed entire civilizations, was gone. Humanity, the species once dismissed as primitive and insignificant, had led the charge and saved them all. But for Rook and the survivors of the fleet, the victory was bittersweet. They had lost too much, sacrificed too many. As Rook stared out at the stars, she thought of Ellis, the commander who had given everything to make this moment possible. "She was right," Rook whispered. "They'll remember us." And for the first time in generations, the galaxy could dream of a future free from fear.